Hello, everyone.
Welcome in.
As a reminder, is our meeting notes document. And please do add your name as an attendee. We'll give just another minute or two for more people to join.
While we're all getting started, I would like to pose a question to this group. So I just came out of the interim WIMSI, workload identity for multi-system environments meeting of the IETF. And one of the participants basically said, look, we are not going to worry about confidential computing alignment in this working group because say you upgrade the workload, and one of the reasons given was if you upgrade the workload from version 4.1 to version 4.2, well, what the measurements change, and this is not something we want to deal with here. And if you read RATs, that's essentially how it reads. So I can't blame him for saying that. Now, so the question behind the question is, we definitely need to figure out how confidential computing aligns with various identity frameworks. WIMSI, SPIFFE, I mean, I don't, ultimately, we don't care. It needs to be done by Kubernetes. It needs to be done up and down the stack. And that's just a deployment requirement. Should we form a separate working group for confidential computing identity? Should we deal with it inside this attestation SIG? Or should we just deal with it in the TAC? And I just wanted to sort of take the room's temperature on that.
So can you expand a little more on the rationale for not considering confidential computing in the WIMSI working group?
Well, basically what they've done, and this is how this conversation came up, is the latest draft of Whimsy in version 3 introduces the concept of a gateway. So client doesn't talk to the workload directly, it talks through a gateway. And behind the gateway, there is a number of workloads. It's essentially the magic behind the curtain. And it may be a series of identical workloads, or it may be two different workloads, perhaps depending on the nature of the request submitted. And then what I raised was when a client wants to talk to a workload, it may want the trifecta of data in transit, data in transit, data and use protections, but it doesn't talk to the ultimate destination where the data, the request is going to be processed. So the gateway may be the TLS terminator, it could be any other thing. But that's effectively your break and inspect pattern. And it's all over the place in the industry, as I'm sure you know. So then I basically said, look, we need to understand how this works end to end. So for instance, if you don't trust your compute provider, you can't automatically go and just terminate TLS and just go clear text behind the gateway and a number of other issues. And ultimately, the identity of the workload as advertised by the gateway needs to be stable in the face of multiple different workloads behind it, whether due to upgrade or due to them being entirely different types of processing. And then one of the participants responded and basically said, look, we're just not going to align with confidential computing because this is just, it's too, the identity of it is too fragile. And again, that wasn't the forum to discuss it in, right? We only had an hour for all sorts of things. But the same thing I've been raising for some time now and will be stubborn about is that we need to figure out what confidential computing identity is and how it integrates. And I'm just simply not willing to let Whimsy run off and not be backwards or forward compatible, or in this case, with what we're doing here. It's going to create deployment blockers. So that's sort of the longer answer to your question.
I see a couple hands raised. Go ahead. I think Greg was first.
Gary was first.
Oh, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with that. I think I think the problem stems from Whimsy borrowing heavily from the OAuth framework, which is all about federation, identity federation. I did raise a similar kind of concern at the last IETF meeting during the open mic. Everything was during the open mic session on not necessarily referring to confidential compute, but I believe it is permissible for the gateway to be operated operated by the computing service provider, and it's all behind essentially a firewall. So what looks like a thoroughly open framework can be deployed as a closed framework. And I think you can get somewhere in the confidential, you'll be able to address some confidential compute scenarios from that perspective. I think if you're doing end to end, where the workloads are being transferred, through firewalls between, like, as an extreme example, between data centers, then yeah, this could actually have some potential security concerns, and the protocols at least would need to be augmented. Maybe not necessarily the architecture. That's the way I read it.
If I were to paraphrase, so you're saying that it could be made compatible with some work rather than just
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's the crux of my question. Has the design now become, has the evolving Whimsy design become such that the core value we're looking for with confidential compute is either impossible or sufficiently high friction that it's going to really be a boat anchor to like adoption of Whimsy for confidential compute scenarios. And based on what I'm hearing, perhaps you can make the case, hey, it's, as you just kind of said, it's totally open and extensible. You can do whatever you want under the covers. But I'm not detecting if there's this gateway that basically is going to have to terminate the TLS, and it's not conceptually what you think of as your workload you want to connect to and have secure interactions with, that seems fundamentally at odds with what we're trying to do with, having collaborating confidential compute protected environments working with each other. They have to have that, there's secure connections between them, and there's not, these trusted gateway kind of things that are in the middle doing gosh knows what.
So as a practitioner, I can tell you, to the first order of approximation, the lack of identity architecture around confidential computing is a boat anchor, and it's not just whimsy. So you look at SPIFFE, and there you have this node attester. And we know that a node attester is effectively a credential provider proxy, right? But whereas your confidential container or your confidential workload might want to do direct attestation and not go through the attestation of the node. That's, a node may in fact host, mutually distrustful workloads, like things like that. So you encounter this all over the place. And then if we go into sort of the real world deployment scenarios, the only thing that works today, more or less reliably, is your workload starts, it attests itself, gets a credential, and then it gets a key out of some HSM. And then with that, it, decrypts some data that obtains from somewhere, and it goes computes on that. But that is not general purpose. What you would like is you would like the thing to get an identity, much like any other compute instance can get an identity, and not just an access, and not just sufficient for getting access to a key. Like if there is a web server somewhere and it's hosts data I want, and it's perhaps, also running confidentially, not encrypted to that key, I should be able to natively just go authenticate to it, authorize to it, establish a secure channel, download the data, go process it, right? So if you try to update your existing deployments, be it like Whimsy doesn't exist yet, but be it SPIFFE or be it any other, be it a Lambda in AWS, I mean, I don't care what it is. If you try to switch over, it is a boat anchor, right? And if we solve it, then we basically unlock all the business potential of the technology. It is definitely a necessary condition.
It's a good point, Mark. This probably should be an area that we explore more in this SIG. I think that, we don't intend to be a standards body. So, but I think some exploration here, and discussion could be helpful. And then if we need to propose that a new working group be formed to actually standardize on something, that seems like a good outcome. I did want to point out to Greg's comment, though, I think that the gateway concept isn't necessarily incompatible in having like TLS terminations. Like if the gateway itself were attested and that attested code, could be shown to correctly attest the other environments, I think people would be willing to still trust the system, and they get a lot of the benefits out of having a gateway. Being able to handle across upgrades or load balancing and discovery and things like that the gateway can provide are things that I know customers I talk to, like that they have these questions that a gateway could solve. And if we could make the transitive trust standardized, then make this a lot easier.
Yeah. And I would say that, when I look at this just holistically, this is what I see. So here's your typical scenario. Say we just did what you just said, Keith, and the gateway gets properly attested, and then it does some sort of secure channel attestation based with its backend. And now we're rolling out an update of one of the backends. Nothing should change from the standpoint of your client, right? Ultimately, the gateway is trusted to continue being that trusted intermediary in between. And there are sometimes regulatory requirements around break and inspect. Those are not going away. So how does your tooling work in this case? Well, it's not sufficient to just go and update your backend. You now have to go and update all the gateway policies to say, recognize this new software. This is, by the way, what's in the GRC SIG we're formulating as patterns, right? So this is how you do. There's a pattern around rolling out updates, right? And having standards is not enough, even if we're not after that. It is really this is an ecosystem issue. Right, and I am with you. Sure, let's discuss them inside this body, but also attestation SIG is about a lot more than just this, right? I mean, I've been participating now for many months, and we do a lot of work. So if we do it here, it may be happening a lot slower than the industry demands. So perhaps maybe raise this in the TAC and ask if you know we should dedicate some focused resources while this working group, you know, continues apace with all the other myriad issues that it's dealing with.
That's fair. Greg?
Just gonna say, when I listen to this, it sounds like the gateway essentially has to be configured with the policy, the trust policy of the relying party, right? So as the workload behind it kind of shifts over time, it can continue to basically say, oh yes, you know, it's changed, but it's still trusted or not. In my head, that's a potential end game. I think there's circumstance, what you're saying, Keith, and makes total sense. You can basically bring the gateway into the TCB and have it have all the right qualities and measurable and then be trusted by the relying party. I think the crux of the issue is that that Mark's pointing out in my mind is that the folks who are thinking about workload identity, you know, we suffer from the double whammy. It's a tier 2 problem from their perspective, a tested workload identity, and it's very complicated and hard. So it gets essentially truncated from kind of being included in the work to kind of come up with, you know, some to be included in the standards proposals or, you know, detailed thinking there. So I like it from my perspective of all the things I've kind of heard talked about in the past, you know, 4 years I've been in this CCC attestation SIG. Probably the two most important for the world I work in are, you know, the attested secure channel and the, you know, tested identity. There's, you know, so this is, you know, I think similar to Mark, this is hugely important in kind of the area I work in. And it is, I think I'm, you know, firmly in the same boat with Mark. I think that we don't, as an industry, make significant progress in the you know, coming months and years, it will, you know, this technology and all the good it can do will suffer in terms of how quickly it can get out there. So I'm
I will
certainly,
add,
yeah, go on.
I will add an additional pressure to this. So I am also a part of the working, you know, of the working stream at the Cloud Security Alliance, and the cloud control matrix is undergoing a facelift in 25. So by mid-year, we're going to have a new updated requirements in the identity and access management domain, as well as in the CK, so cryptography and encryption key management domain, although the latter one is not the right place for it. So briefly, CEK domain is now going to start requiring data in use protection alongside data at rest and in transit. And it's really not a cryptography encryption key problem, but that's where it's going to live for now. And the identity access management domain is undergoing a wholesale like facelift, where user identity and non-human identities are going to be treated the same for purposes of governance, lifecycle management, and so on and so forth. So organizations that are faced with these updated requirements are going to be looking to us, the industry, to see how they can be satisfied. And you know, regulations move fairly slowly. I've taken the approach of forcing regulation updates so that we can catch up, because that's, I mean, otherwise the chicken and egg never gets solved. So I'm on the record behind these updates. But you know, we need to start thinking about what are we going to offer industry in enhancing this compliance.
So I completely agree all around. As Greg was saying, like I think I also view this as one of the same two big problems are on my mind: the actual testing protocol, getting that standardized, and how to do identity. Like we've done a lot of looking into things like Spiffy, but I do think that it's in our interest as a SIG to make sure that this moves forward. And it's like to your point, Mark, I guess it's a question of how do we do that? Like how do we best use our resources or influence on other resources to get that done? So what do we think next steps should be?
Well, so already, at least through me, hopefully through others, we now have a seat at the table at Whimsy. Separately, folks that deal with Spiffy, they need to be brought on board, and we need to understand how Spiffy architecture works with the node tester architecture choices that they have made. And so some decisions need to be made. I'm sure there are existing vendors in our little cottage industry around confidential containers, etc., that should have a say in how this is going to be handled. But look, from where I'm sitting, this is not okay. I'm an architect, but it is a very practical issue of we would like to do this. We would like to pay hyperscalers and vendors for their efforts. There is regulated institutions generally will not lift a finger until regulators tell them to, with exceptions, but right. So the will is there, the customer base is there, right? And the problem that needs to be solved is not the architectural problem, it's the deployment problem. How do I take my IT estate, which in our case is just the number of individual applications we have is in mid 4 digits. It is enormous. And we're not going to rewrite it around these requirements. We need basically easy on-ramps, right? And in the clouds in which we operate. So, let's start looking where the deployments are that need to be uplifted. So I would definitely do Spiffy because it has enough industry weight, and because look at others, but that would be the way. Start from solving the actual deployment problem the customer faces across the stack and start offering solutions. Now, again, we still have the luxury of time because the regulations do not move like Microsoft and Google and Amazon move. But I'm raising a red flag now that this needs to be start looked at like now, so that perhaps in a year, 18 months, we can now be on the market with products, or you guys rather, that the folks like us can consume.
That sounds great, but I still come back to like what we should do in this SIG to make that interest.
Well,
or
where I don't know if it's the SIG, and this is how but this was my first question: is this like what's the right place? But the consortium must address this. And what can we do? My suggestion is we start working with the technologies that are out there, that where customers deploy their existing workloads, and we start figuring out how to get them to offer the right deployment patterns, the right features, figure out what's missing, right? And and then you do a gradient descent back. You work back from that to what needs to be done in industry bodies and standards, to change, hopefully with the smallest amount of effort.
I'm a bit confused with the maturity of these and the quantity. And so I was caught a little off guard when the suggestion seemed to be, let's go sprinkle around everywhere. Let's go engage with the Spiffy. Let's perhaps, I don't know if this was said specifically, but let's continue the conversation with Whimsy. And let's also think about what, one-ofs are doing in container scenarios and then, so I'm not. It seems like one of the challenges to date has been there's not been enough. There's not been engagement from folks to flesh out this space anywhere. So starting off by saying next steps is let's engage everywhere sounds like a very large step versus, it sounds like multiple steps at once to me, but I'm very,
And
uneducated in the space. So
that's a fair criticism. Let me attempt a scope reduction here. So the thing that the industry will be doing is workload identity. That, in my mind, is beyond doubt. When an organization such as mine looks at how do we adopt workload identity in our enterprise, we are not brewing our own, right? We're more of an integrator shop. It's not our line of work. So we'll probably be looking at something. Let's say, for sake of argument, it's spiffy. Then we're going to then, work out within the spiffy's extensibility model, what can we do? And, is it large? Well, I mean, hopefully we're not boiling the ocean when we do that. But then we're looking to the industry and say, look, we're not probably writing our own node testers. We're not developing software at that level. It is, we're looking for framework solutions. So that should give you at least an idea of where to start. And I'm not saying it's spiffy, I'm saying it could be. But anything that plays in the workload identity space needs to then also say, explain to us how to do this in a way that data is protected and used. And the regulatory drivers for this are, so Singapore, a number of European regulators are starting to make noise that they care about it. Anybody dealing with data privacy, so under GDPR, will probably start making the same noises. Again, this is coming not just from CSA. So we are under increasingly full frontal assault from multiple corners to, to do data and use protection. This is good for confidential computing, architectures and vendors, if we can seize the moment.
I'm not sure if Usama or Giri had their hand up first.
You can go ahead.
I think Asama did. Why don't you go first?
Okay, it's fine. I get a bit nervous, Mark, when you say that. It looks to me more like the GRC work. So I'm trying to understand what would be the kind of technical work that is being proposed. And number two, do we have anyone in the SIG who is familiar with SPIFFY and all the details that we could technically take up this work? If we do not have the expertise, then
I'm fairly familiar with SPIFFY at this point, because specifically I'm looking in if it's a suitable technology for us. As far as GRC specifies patterns. GRC basically says, do these things if you want to have a compliant, hopefully secure data and use protection environment. So one way to connect them is read our patterns, right, around workload management, around workload upgrades, etc., around AVS governance. That's still in draft, but getting close. And let's look. So, Greg, you represent Microsoft, and Keith, you represent Google. Let's take a look and see to what extent can we satisfy these patterns or allow customers to implement these patterns with the offerings you have, right? And that will immediately show the gaps. Or you can, of course, disagree with the patterns, and we're happy to work with you on revisions. But that's how I see connecting. And that's a complicated area. Fortunately, we have enough brain power in this group to
But my question, but just to be clear, so my question was kind of, when you are talking about such kind of policies or things like that, so it falls directly under the GRC. I am trying to understand, and I didn't hear that clearly. So my question was, what are the technical perspectives that you think are relevant for this group? Or what technical part do you think can be done? Can you elaborate on that rather than the policies?
Let me I don't know. I guess I'll be repeating myself, but this is what I'm saying. So if you read the workload management and workload governance, workload update governance patterns, right? What I would like to understand is, can I implement these patterns on Azure, on GCP, right? If I can, then we should publish guidance. And if I can't, then two things: either the pattern is wrong, or there are gaps, or maybe both. And then we can go and address those. So that's how you interact this with the GRC work. This GRC work will effectively advise customers on how to comply with the regulations that are coming down the pike.
Okay, so what I understood, I will try to phrase. So what you are saying is that the GRC will make some patterns and the technical or the implementation work will be carried out here. That's what you propose, right? And then there will be some connection between the two. Is it kind of
I
capturing?
believe that's the way to think about it. Yes, and again,
Okay.
the work will actually happen at Microsoft, at Google, at AWS when they look into it, right? But I don't expect that everyone's going to implement it exactly the same way. 'Cause every cloud has its own walled garden. But take a look. Imagine yourself, you're being the customer. Imagine that you read this pattern and now you're looking to implement it in your environment. And importantly, with the software you already have deployed, right? And imagine that your developers are JavaScript and Python developers, not versed in Rust and C++ and writing, spiffy node attestation plugins. What do you do? Right, like, and then let's figure out how to make the customer's life possible, let alone easy. It's an existential requirement, like an existential business requirement for us to be able to adopt, like, which we would very much like to.
Yeah. Gary?
Yeah. So getting back to this, Mike, I'm still kind of want to understand exactly what you think should be done in Whimsy, right? Because they're trying to define an interoperable protocol. I personally don't think the architecture is that realistic, because I think it kind of assumes that you can transfer workloads between different cloud service providers. You can assign identities that are interoperable between different cloud service providers. But let's assume that's the case. A lot of the technologies that have been discussed in CCC can be used in conjunction with whatever they're defining there, like a tested TLS. It should be interoperable. It should actually work through gateways, and it can be used in conjunction with what's being defined there. So, I mean, it seems like you can always the CCC can always put in an informational doc saying, okay, if you really want to make this work for confidential compute, such that there is confidence in the workload, in the originator workload, and that workload has been successfully transferred to a destination, if that's the use case, or sure there are other use cases for workload identity, then it seems like it's a fairly straightforward problem to solve. It's just an informational doc that you can put into the Whimsy working group to say, okay, this is how you would get it to work for confidential compute, and bring all the component technologies and describe them there. So I mean, because I think trying to get Whimsy to say, okay, we're going to gate these specs based on the confidential compute requirements, that's going to be a tall ask. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Yeah.
So specifically to answer your question, how would I approach this with Whimsy? So if I were in Greg's shoes, I guess for some 20+ years I was, so maybe I still remember something. I would not just publish an informational doc. I would publish a GitHub prototype of how your typical application perhaps written in, again, JavaScript or Python. This is what a lot of work is out there. How it works in that kind of environment. In the process, you go and discover, what are the difficulties? What are the reusable pieces that you can share with your customer? What is wrong with the protocols and, the approaches that they propose? So perhaps we can go fix this. So I do not believe an informational doc will do it because short of somebody sitting down and writing the code and experiencing some of the pain, you're not going to allow our developers to be able to adopt it. They're not going to be able to read the doc and just say, oh, okay, I know exactly how to write this code.
If you don't mind, and have a follow-up then. The critical or the most difficult use case for interop would be an example where you actually provide a working implementation where workloads can authenticate between two different service providers, say Azure and GCP, Google Cloud, I should say.
That's
How is it that?
one.
Yeah,
That's one for sure. But there is another one. Say I'm within Azure, and I forget. Forgive me, I don't remember the names of all the functions. But if I am also doing serverless, if I'm also doing step functions, if I'm also using notification services, if I'm using like all the building blocks in the cloud that I now need to protect end to end, right? What am I doing here? How do I, deploy a workload, which is a combination of software, that presents itself as a single unit to the outside world. So if you think about Whimsy through some kind of gateway, and then how do I maintain it in a high availability scenario when I need to roll out updates, like things like that. If Microsoft has not done it internally in a way that it can share it with customers, we do not stand a snowball's chance in hell being able to do that on our own.
okay, fair enough. But I think the way I understand the gateway usage in the Whimsy architecture is that's how the workload talks to the outside world. What you just described, there doesn't need to be talking to the outside world in that case because it's all behind the cloud service providers, all
There's
within the cloud service
three
providers network.
layers here. There is a workload, and the workload exposes itself to somebody through a gateway, and there are pieces inside the workload, again, running confidentially, individually, talking to each other. The second one is I have two applications running in Azure under the same account as JP Morgan, and one uses the SaaS services of another. So again, services stack. We also have our platform services, and they provide API to higher level workloads, same workload to workload, but it's not between Google and Azure. It's Azure to Azure. And then the third one is what you said. Yes, now we are doing some, multi-party computation with another institution or with ourselves, and now we're crossing cloud boundaries. What do we do? Right,
Okay.
all of that needs to have like essentially templatized, patternized examples of actual code that we can go and adopt.
Got it. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Greg?
Yeah, I think this SIG, from what I understand, its intent is to kind of focus in on trying to identify opportunities to create open source code that can provide shared framework infrastructure for problems in the remote attestation space, confidential compute space. And it seems to me like what I'm hearing and what I understand is the state of figuring out call it a standard, call it a shared vision. That's the wrong term, but the state of a shared design, a shared standard for a tested workload identity is not there yet. So starting to write some code, open source code with reasonable confidence that this code will be useful 1, 2, 3 years in the future doesn't appear to be the case. That appears to be part of what we're bumping up against. So the desire to take some action now is in the space that this SIG, where the action really needs to be, I think, is in help fleshing out the emerging standards, or thinking through a remote attestation in a spiffy, scenario kind of thing. So that's part of the potential disconnect I think I'm sensing here.
So
And
let me say to you what I just heard you say from a customer's lens, and please don't take any offense, and because because I don't want to sound abrasive. I sometimes do. What I just heard you say is Microsoft does not know how
hang
to
on,
help
I
a
don't
customer implement workload identity.
No,
And
no,
I
hang
actually
on.
expect that to be the case.
I'm speaking for Greg Costner. Anything I'm saying here is Greg Costner, right? I may work at Microsoft. I do not represent all knowledge at Microsoft, all positions at Microsoft. I did notice that you made me responsible for that in the last 5 minutes. That is inaccurate.
Okay.
And you know it. You're smiling.
Right. I guess what I'm trying, this is my ask. My ask is, as a very much like the core representative customer for this technology, I would like to come to a solutions architect at Google, at Amazon, at Microsoft. And I would like to ask specifically this question. I need to comply with these regulations. I have an existing code base, and I need things that will allow me to utilize this technology in a way that's future-proof. And the best way to convince me that you Microsoft, not you, Greg, that you can help me is where you can point me at, yes, we've done this, this is the software stack that you can adopt and it will work. And in doing so, you can now, you and I and whatever people who are interested in this can go talk to Whimsy, talk to Spiffy, talk to all the bits and bobs involved in that to make that possible and figure out what's missing and what's incorrect.
I think I understand your perspective and your problem, and the problems you face. And so I hear you. I am not a solutions architect. I don't represent Microsoft. I am here for the purpose of for different purposes than to be the Microsoft solutions architect, right? So I can help, try to find such, people exist here and help connect you and things like that. But
yeah.
And so yeah.
But I can also speak on behalf of the industry, much like I'm not speaking really for myself, and like even my employer does not fully grok what's involved. They've seen a few demos, right? But I can tell you with certainty that perhaps you and I both in Seattle area can make over a coffee, hash it out. None of this is personal, right? But yeah, let's get us to a point where the industry knows how to adopt this tech in the face of new regulations, which is the thing that will force our hand.
So one quick question. So as far as I understand, so what you are saying is you want to start with some GRC policies, and what's my current understanding from seeing your document and a couple of others that I read just for information, there seems to be a big gap between what you want in the end, kind of the implementation thing. That's what I'm hearing from you from the technical perspective. And from going from these high-level documents directly to implementation is not possible in my perspective. You are kind of missing one step in between, which is kind of specifications document, some technical document of how these two things match together. I don't think
2 or even 3 steps. Like it's not just one step. It maybe could be multiple steps.
At least, sure. At least one step is missing in my mind that would probably be the most relevant one for attestation SIG. Like if we have some kind of specifications, we can technically talk about them. But I don't think that kind of the policy document that I have seen are a good starting point for us to, or at least for me to get started with doing some kind of coding or to even to understand what does that mean. So these are kind of requirements you want satisfied. There should be something in combination to that, which should say, hey, this is the code I have. Let's say the specifications I have. And then that's a technical question that you want to ask, that these are the requirements or the goals. And this is the specification. Does this specification meet these goals or not? Or the next step, does this piece of code meet these specifications or the high level goal or not? So this is something I'm thinking about. Is this the overall picture that you are imagining? Like there would be some steps in between, and then you go to the implementation, right?
Right. So it's unfortunately impossible to think of regulations as specifications. So let's just with that correction. And this is why GRC and governance patterns are necessarily written as technology agnostic as humanly possible. All right, so you're not going to find a specification there. You're going to find guidance there, list of general list of expectations, and just look to any standard in the governance space. You'll find much the same thing, like a wide scope of interpretations. But practically, what it means is ability to adopt technology today. Is limited by availability of tooling, templates, examples, end-to-end thinking. And this is where we're looking to the industry to help us.
But I mean, who is going to write that? So if let's say I'm a volunteer to write that, so just imagine. So where do I start? I need some specifications of what do I need to want to implement. That policy document is not a good starting point, right? So I'm
no.
kind of trying to understand, is this falling under GRC? What GRC will give me? Will it be a kind of a more technical specifications document, or will it be still like a policy document? So what would be the starting point for the SIG?
You want to start with, you sound like you want to start with, what the GRC pattern says you should do. What I'm saying is the starting point is you have some deployed code that uses your typical, cloud arrangement of things, compute units, queuing units, authentication units, serverless units, down the list, all of that, like database services and whatnot. And now you're saying, I would like to be able to switch that such that we can process data confidentially while in use, and using workload identity, as now we're required to do, managing workload identities end to end. And what is missing is the ability to do that uplift. And then once you figure out how to do that uplift, you can now figure out, what evidence you can collect in the systems in question to be able to satisfy the auditor, which is actually not the first step where you start with, but the last step in that process. Like the real world is the body of software that exists, that is out there right now.
Right, thanks.
Okay, so we're about 50 minutes into this week. I don't think we can make much progress on other topics. I think that the discussion we've had today, I think there's room for I know, Mark, your call to industry is a little bit different, but I think there's room for discussion in this group around some of these areas, like discussion around whimsy and spiffy and how it relates to confidential, and have kind of some sharing of ideas there. I wonder if we could get any volunteers for people that are well versed in those areas to lead that discussion in future weeks.
Yeah, and by the way, I started out asking a question: where does this belong? I honestly did not expect the entire meeting to go to this topic, which comes back to,
it's a great topic.
Right, but it comes back to how much of our hour twice, every 2 weeks we're going to dedicate to this, or should we have a separate focused discussion on this? And then is it a tact level thing? Is it a separate SIG level thing? And that is because again, I don't know. I actually don't feel good about having hijacked. I don't even know what else was on the agenda. Like, it certainly wasn't all about my pain point here, right? So, I would like to understand. I know it needs to be solved. Where and how is the next step?
What other people here think? There's a few hands raised. I did not see them go up, so I don't know who's up first.
It was me. So Yogesh, so two things I can see that first, we need to engage with the Whimsy group. I don't know whether they have presented in the CCC or not yet, the work they are doing. That's one thing, if not already done, we should do. The second thing is we should have some requirements doc coming from CCC perspective. If what are the use cases from CCC we would like to see being addressed from with an intersection with the workload identity, and then we can see that the work they are doing is enough to cater our requirements, or we need to provide a feedback to them too, so that they are aligned with our requirements. That's my take.
Yeah, and now we have an additional complication that Whimsy says we don't care about confidential in today's meeting. And it was one person saying it, others agreed, and I'm like, we now have to do something to now counteract that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very bad narrative if they're coming up with saying that they don't care about confidential computing. It's not a right way to put
but it's not. It's fixable. It's just
maybe lack of knowledge and lack of understanding of CCC.
And certainly, if you read the RATS doc, you would walk away with exactly what they concluded. Thomas?
Was it me? I think it was Usama first.
Well, you have your hand raised.
Go ahead.
I do.
Thomas. Yeah.
Okay. 2 points, Yogesh. Regarding requirements, we have, actually, in fact, Mark has provided a document that is public under the meetings using folder. I will copy that here. That's a starting point. Wait a second, where is it? Here. And to answer, my 2 cents, Mark, when you say how we want to structure the thing, I think, yeah, right. The SIG meets every 2 weeks, but if we spin a sub-project like we did, for other topics, we have freedom to meet whenever we want and to report back to the SIG at the regular cadence. But we could have sprints of a couple of weeks and meet every day, and it doesn't matter. Right? We are not forced to follow, this sparse meeting schedule, and so we can make progress pretty quickly, I would say. So my suggestion would be to...
In my ideal world, would just rename this attestation and workload identity SIG and, double our meeting frequency until we figure this out.
I don't think that is really possible, but we can spin a sub-project, and as we've done for many things and run with that.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I completely agree with Thomas. I think the identity is such a topic we can talk for hours. It's not difficult to keep talking about it. The main important thing is how much progress we have made in the whole hour, or what useful things we have got out of it, or what are the next actionable steps. So from technical perspective, of course, there are GRC and other interests and so on. But from technical perspective, we have to also see what progress we have actually made in the whole hour. Just keeping discussing is not the whole thing, right? So I suggest that there should be some kind of a sub-project which talks about it, brings back the results to the SIG.
Right, and we are reaching the end of our hour here. I think we need to wrap this up. I want to make sure we have something coming out of it to that point there. Is there somebody who could volunteer putting together a proposal for a sub-project?
I could. Again, please read my musing. That's, see if that's a proposal enough, or if something you feel is missing.
I think we've had a bit of a structure around proposals in the past. I'd have to look at, I think we opened a PR on the governance with kind of what the structure of the actual working group would be. But anyway, if you'll take an action item on that, that'd be great. Please, if you could add a link to your musing documents. I see it's linked in the chat. If you could put it in the meeting notes, that would also be good for people to be able to find it. Before we finish, it was mentioned in the chat, and thank you. It was on the agenda later on, but there is an attestation workshop at FOSDEM. I will not be attending, but anybody who is attending, want to give it a quick shout out for everyone else? Fritz, you put it in the chat. Do you want to draw attention to it at all?
Yeah, it's different. So Usama and Thomas are organizing the attestation workshop. But what I'm organizing, sorry for the noise. What I'm organizing is a social event on Saturday evening in Brussels Center. So, but both things are related, right? So we have, I think, 4 things now going on at FOSDEM. We have an attestation workshop on Friday. We have a confidential computing dev room on Saturday, a confidential computing social event on Saturday evening. Please register if you shout it widely to have people come on Saturday evening. And then on Sunday, we have the attestation dev room also organized by Usama and Thomas. So if you're in Brussels, there's lots of stuff to go on. And please also, if you know someone that goes to Brussels, help us spread the word, because I think it can be a great time. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. And then I think lastly, before we can hang up, we need a chair for the next meeting. Any of the SIG chairs?
I am logically the next person, but I can't take it on because I can't guarantee I'll be here in 2 weeks. I've got a personal thing going on.
Okay. Who else do we have on the call here?
You can put my name down.
Oh, thanks, Jim.
Was that Jim?
Jim,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks, Jim. I'll
Thank
get
you.
it after this one.
All right. And I think that there is a topic or two from the current week that we did not get to this week. So those can carry over. And then I think we'll hopefully have a follow-up from this discussion as well to pick up.
Yeah, can I have a last minute thing? So chairs, please take a look at the proposal I made for the budget allocation. It's on the governance repo, under the governance report. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay.
All right. And we're finishing, just in time here. Thank you, everybody. It was a great discussion. I think it was productive, even if just to highlight where more discussion is needed, which is a great use of our time here. So thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Take care.
Bye.